The sizzle of burgers on the grill was the only sound we could hear, until everything changed. I moved out here to this ranch in Crestview, Texas, hoping to escape the chaos of city life, looking for peace, solitude, and a place where no one could tell me what to do. But just when I thought I'd found my sanctuary, it all blew up in my face. Out of nowhere, I was surrounded by police, sirens blaring, tires crunching on gravel, and dust clouds filling the golden evening sky. It was surreal. I stood there with a spatula in one hand, watching as 3 squad cars tore down my private road like they were busting a meth lab, not a backyard barbecue. And who sent them? Diane Palmer, the president of the Crestview HOA. According to her, I was trespassing on my own land. She knew exactly what she was doing. You see, for years, the HOA had been quietly using my private lake behind my back. Secret parties, unauthorized fishing trips, even their annual community retreat, all without asking for permission. I hadn't known the extent of it until recently, but the minute I started raising questions and exposing the truth, Diane panicked. She knew if the truth got out, her entire little empire of lies would collapse. So she went nuclear, and I mean that literally. That evening started off as one of the best I'd had in a long time. Ryan Foster, my best friend since high school, had come out to spend the weekend. We set up camp down by the lake, just like old times. The breeze was perfect, the air smelled like smoke and cedar, and as the sun dipped low, casting orange streaks across the water, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Ryan handed me a beer, clinking it against mine with that big, goofy grin of his, and said, "Nathan, buddy, this right here, this is what life's all about." And for a moment, it really was. Just us, nature, and not a care in the world. Then the sirens started. At first, I thought maybe someone crashed on the highway nearby, but they kept getting closer. Too close. Ryan and I looked at each other, eyebrows raised, hearts sinking. And then the cruisers burst through the tree line like a scene from a movie. Lights flashing, dust rising, and doors swinging open with practiced urgency. Out stepped Sheriff Greg Hansen, one hand hovering near his holster, a look on his face like he'd just swallowed a lemon. I could tell right away he wasn't happy to be there. Behind him stood 2 officers, and then her, Diane Palmer, arms crossed, lips pursed, with her loyal shadow Claire Hughes standing right beside her like some kind of HOA attack dog. The smugness on their faces made my blood boil. "Nathan Brooks," Sheriff Hansen called, his voice echoing across the clearing. "I'm gonna need you to step away from the grill and show me some ID." My hand trembled as I set the spatula down. Sweat rolled down my back, even though the sun had started to cool. "What's this about, Sheriff?" I asked, doing my best to keep my voice steady. "I'm on my own property." That's when Diane launched into her act. She pointed at me like she was accusing me of grand theft, her voice shrieking like a siren. "He's trespassing. This is community land. Get him out of here. Call SWAT if you have to." I nearly laughed. If it weren't for the seriousness of the situation, it would have been laughable. Claire chimed in too, parroting Diane's hysteria, urging the officers to search our tent, saying who knew what kind of illegal activities we were hiding. I could barely believe what I was hearing. But then came the moment that changed everything. I reached for my wallet, hands still shaking, and pulled out the deed to the property, something my dad had always insisted I carry with me. "Just in case the world goes crazy," he'd said. Turns out, he was right. I handed the deed over to Sheriff Hansen, praying it would be enough. As he studied the document with his flashlight, I caught sight of Eleanor Walsh, another HOA member, arguing with Diane near the tree line. Their voices were too low to hear clearly, but Eleanor looked furious. Sheriff Hansen finally looked up. "This deed clearly shows Nathan Brooks is the legal owner of this land," he said slowly, giving Diane a long, hard stare. But she didn't back down. Her face turned purple with rage. "That must be forged," she spat. "He's ruining the environment. He's a danger to this community." Ryan, who'd been quiet until then, stepped up beside me. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "Nathan's had this land for 5 years. His family's had it for generations. Maybe you're the one confused." Diane's glare could have melted steel. The standoff dragged on, with Diane tossing out wild accusations and Claire echoing every word. But finally, Sheriff Hansen had had enough. "Mrs. Palmer," he said firmly, "Mr. Brooks has provided sufficient proof. Unless you have hard evidence to the contrary, we're done here." He turned to me and nodded. Sorry for the inconvenience, Nathan. You folks enjoy your evening. As the cruisers pulled away, Diane and Claire stood there like scorned villains in a bad play, their threats echoing in the dusk. Ryan and I were left to clean up the mess, but something caught my attention. Trash near the lake's edge. Beer cans, plastic plates, none of it ours. I walked over, picking up litter, and there it was, an official HOA invitation. Crest View Annual Picnic, printed on HOA letterhead, signed by Diane herself. But what stopped me cold was the handwritten note in the margin. Urgent meeting about the lake. Do not discuss outside board. Dated just last week. That was no innocent picnic. Turns out, Diane had been hiding a lot more than a few unauthorized barbecues. Whatever her plan was, I knew it had to be big and dirty. I thought getting the cops called on me was the worst of it. I was wrong, because what she did next crossed every line imaginable. The following Monday started like any other day. I was sipping my coffee, scrolling through the neighborhood app, when the posts started popping up, one after another, all accusing me of being unhinged. Nathan Brooks is destroying our lake. He's polluting Crest View's shared spaces. The posts were detailed, venomous, and worst of all, people were believing them. Diane had mobilized the HOA rumor machine, and she was painting me as a threat to the entire community. My hand shook as I set down the phone. My coffee mug slipped and shattered across the floor, sending hot liquid everywhere. But the mess in my kitchen was nothing compared to the digital firestorm Diane had just ignited. And I knew this was just the beginning. Would you have stood your ground? Let me know whose side you're on, Team Nathan or Team Diane, because this battle wasn't just personal anymore. It was war, including local business owners claiming I was dumping chemicals, scaring wildlife, and threatening anyone who came near the community lake. My reputation, one I had spent years building through hard work, honesty, and being a good neighbor, was being ripped to shreds by a woman who seemed to have no moral compass. Diane Palmer didn't just attack me personally. She launched a campaign of public humiliation fueled by lies and amplified by social media. The comments section was an absolute nightmare. People I'd known for years, people I had helped and laughed with, were suddenly turning on me, believing every word she said. One comment from the owner of Crest View Grocery read, "We don't need people like that in Crest View." That single sentence hit me harder than I expected. The full weight of it all came crashing down later that day when I stopped by First Community Market to pick up a few basic supplies. Mrs. Henderson, the sweet older woman who had rung up my groceries for 3 years, wouldn't even make eye contact. Her hands trembled slightly as she scanned the items. Then she quietly said, "I'm sorry, Nathan, but we can't serve you today." I stood there frozen, a bag of apples in my hand, heart sinking as the customers around me began to whisper. Eyes followed me as if I were dangerous, contagious, unwelcome. It felt like being exiled from my own hometown. Still trying to wrap my head around it all, I walked to the hardware store hoping for some shred of normalcy. But the rumors had already reached there too. Tom, the owner, a man who'd once helped me rebuild my grandpa's old fishing boat, just stood there with a resigned look. "Nothing personal, Brooks," he said, "but I can't afford to lose customers over this. Maybe when things calm down." The sting of those words went deeper than any insult. I wasn't just losing face. I was losing my place in this town. Diane wasn't simply spreading rumors. She was orchestrating my social death. Later that evening, I found myself back at the lake, the only place that still felt familiar. I sat on the old wooden bench my grandfather built decades ago, my hands trembling, not from the cold, but from the overwhelming frustration tightening my chest. I looked out over the still water and whispered, "I came here to fish, not fight," as if the wind might carry my words somewhere they'd make sense. It all felt so surreal. How had things escalated to this? About an hour later, Ryan showed up, carrying a six-pack and wearing that lopsided grin he always used when trying to lift the mood. "Heard about the social media circus," he said, dropping beside me. "Diane thinks she's Captain America, defending the neighborhood from evil Nathan." Despite everything, I cracked a small smile. Ryan had that effect. Humor even in chaos. "Man, I don't even know what to do anymore," I admitted, my voice lower than usual. "She's turning the whole town against me over lies." Ryan's smile faded, his expression turning serious, something that didn't happen often with him. "Then we fight back with the truth, buddy," he said. "But first, Let's find out what else these HOA clowns have been up to. We grabbed a couple of flashlights and spent the next hour combing the lakeshore. What we found was more revealing than anything we expected. Footprints, dozens of them, in soft patches of earth. Heels, loafers, not the boots you'd expect near the water. Someone had been here. We found a folding chair half buried in the rocks, like it had been left behind after a casual gathering. But the real shock came when Ryan's light reflected something metallic in the mud. I bent down and picked it up, a silver bracelet, pristine and unmistakably expensive. The engraving stopped my breath cold. Diane Palmer, HOA President, 2019 to present. My mind raced. Ryan, this bracelet's practically new. She's been here recently. He nodded, his usual joking demeanor gone. This is evidence, Nathan. She's been trespassing on your land while accusing you of the same thing. We carefully documented everything, snapping photos of footprints, the chair, the bracelet, even the cigarette butts we found in the grass. We bagged the bracelet and decided that if they wanted war, they'd get it, on our terms. The next morning, I marched straight to the HOA office on Maple Street. The building, a pristine converted home, practically oozed self-importance. White paint so perfect it almost blinded you. Bushes trimmed within an inch of their lives. I spotted Eleanor Walsh, the same woman who had clashed with Diane at that police incident a few weeks back. She sat outside on a bench, eyes wary. "Morning, Mrs. Walsh." I greeted her politely. She looked up slowly and gave me a cryptic nod, eyes flicking toward the front door. "Be careful in there, young man. Some people's power trips go too far." Before I could ask what she meant, she stood and walked away, her silence almost heavier than her words. Inside, Diane was behind a massive oak desk like a queen behind her throne. Claire stood beside her, arms crossed, a human bulldog guarding her queen. "Mr. Brooks," Diane said, voice dripping with false charm, "what brings you here today? Come to confess." I remained calm and pulled out the invitation I found near the lake. I placed it on the desk between us. "I came to ask about this. Your group has been holding events on my private lake." Diane's eye twitched, but her composure returned in an instant. "That's clearly fake. We don't trespass." Her words flowed with practiced ease. Claire added, "Unlike some people, we respect boundaries." The hypocrisy would have been laughable if I wasn't so angry. I left the office gritting my teeth, more determined than ever to get to the bottom of it all. Back home, I went digging through my dad's old documents for anything that could help prove my ownership. Mid-search, Ryan called. "Dude, what if we install hidden cameras? If they're sneaking in, we'll catch them in the act." It was genius. That evening, under the cover of dusk, we set up motion-activated cameras around the property. Ryan, of course, was loving every minute. "We're basically spies now. I always wanted to be in a spy movie." His enthusiasm was contagious. I found myself smiling for the first time in days. But that smile faded quickly. One of the first videos we captured showed a hooded figure creeping along the lake at midnight. My stomach turned. This wasn't just trespassing anymore. This felt targeted. We didn't know who it was, but it didn't feel random. And then came the HOA meeting. The Crestview Community Center was packed. Neighbors, board members, reporters. The room buzzed with tension. I walked in, my laptop bag strapped over my shoulder, filled with something far more powerful than words. Proof. Real, undeniable proof. I had spent the night editing together the footage. Claire laughing with a glass of wine. Board members tossing trash like it was their backyard, trespassing, destroying the same ecosystem they accused me of harming. As I stood in the middle of the room, I didn't wait for permission. "Before we start tonight's agenda," I said, loud and clear, "there's something everyone needs to see." Dozens of eyes turned toward me. The projector clicked on. Diane's carefully cultivated control was about to collapse, and I was the one holding the remote. The room buzzed with a strange mix of anticipation and simmering hostility. Some faces were open and curious, while others, clearly loyal to Diane, glared at me like I was desecrating some sacred ritual. It felt like I had stepped into enemy territory, yet somehow, my hands remained steady as I connected my laptop to the projector. The adrenaline coursing through my veins should have made me shake, but something about this moment grounded me. I had the truth, and it was finally time to share it. "You've all heard the accusations against me," I said, my voice firm as I scanned the room. locking eyes with as many people as I could. Now let me show you what's really been happening at my lake. The video began to play. On screen, Claire and 3 other board members appeared, cheerfully setting up an extravagant picnic just 20 feet from the area Diane had so dramatically claimed was environmentally sensitive. The timestamp flashed across the screen last Tuesday, just 2 days after the police had been called on me. The room erupted in hushed murmurs. I could hear whispers behind me. Wait, is that lake really ours? I thought it was supposed to be community property. I let the footage do the heavy lifting. It showed Claire popping a bottle of champagne, while board members littered the shoreline with plastic cups and paper plates. One of them even carved their initials into the trunk of an old oak. But the damning part, the part that changed everything, was the audio. Claire's voice, loud and clear. Diane was right. This place is perfect for our private gatherings. That Brooks guy will never know. The shift in the room was almost physical. I could feel it, the doubts setting in, the cracks forming in Diane's carefully constructed image. For the first time in weeks, people were starting to question the story they'd been spoon-fed. That fragile moment of awakening, though, didn't last long. Diane, ever the queen of spectacle, stood with a dramatic flair and pulled out her phone like a magician about to reveal her final trick. Well, she said, voice syrupy with false sincerity. If we're all sharing videos, I have one too. And I think everyone needs to see this. The screen behind me flickered and changed. Now it was me on the screen, or someone who looked like me. I was at the lake, face twisted in rage, arms flailing wildly. The audio was garbled but loud enough to catch the shouting, furious, unhinged yelling that sent a chill through the room. The timestamp said yesterday afternoon, but I wasn't there. I wasn't anywhere near the lake. I'd been at work all day, buried in a crisis with a late shipment. I hadn't clocked out until well after 7 p.m. But that didn't matter. Not to the video, not to the room suddenly filled with stares of judgment and fear. This, Diane said triumphantly, is the real Nathan Brooks. Threatening our board members. Violent. Dangerous. All while they were just trying to assess the environmental damage. Before I could open my mouth to object, she was live-streaming the video to the HOA's social media page, whipping the crowd into a frenzy with a single thumb tap. Claire stood slowly, casting a nervous glance at Diane, then looked at the crowd with wide, trembling eyes. It scared me so badly, she whispered, her voice breaking in perfect performance. We need to get this thug out of our neighborhood before someone gets hurt. Chaos exploded. People were shouting over one another, taking sides, demanding action. I tried to protest, to tell them the video was doctored and I had work logs to prove my alibi, but it didn't matter. My voice was lost in the stampede of fear and outrage Diane had expertly orchestrated. I sank into my seat, shoulders sagging, heart pounding with a toxic mix of rage and helplessness. How could they believe this? How could people who had known me for years accept something so obviously false? Later, in the parking lot, I sat alone in my car, gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline, whispering to no one but myself. Am I really fighting the whole town? How did it come to this? Then I saw her, Eleanor Walsh. She walked slowly, but there was purpose in her stride. Her eyes locked on mine, and something about her gaze made me lower the window without thinking. That video is faker than Diane's smile, she said quietly, almost too calmly. I saw her tuck something into her folder just before the stream. Keep fighting, young man. The truth has a funny way of rising. She walked away before I could respond. And that's when I noticed another figure, Sheriff Greg Hansen, leaning against his cruiser near my truck, arms crossed, stroking his chin. Watching. Brooks, he called out as I opened my door. That video? It doesn't sit right with me. The lighting. The angle. I've seen enough tampered security footage in my day to recognize when something's been cut. Then he glanced long and hard at Diane's car as it pulled away. Some people think a little power makes them invincible, he added. They're usually wrong. His words hit like a spark in the darkness. A glimmer of something I hadn't felt in days, hope. Back home, I didn't waste a second. I called Ryan. We need to dig deeper, I told him. There's something in the property records, I can feel it. There's a reason Diane wants my lake so badly. Ryan didn't hesitate. Already on it, he replied. I've got a buddy at the county records office. Meet me there first thing tomorrow. The next morning, surrounded by yellowed papers and the musty smell of government storage, we hit gold. Ryan, grinning like he'd just solved a murder mystery, laid a surveyor's map from 1998 in front of me. "Look at this," he said, pointing at a crooked line. "The HOA's access road. It crosses your property. Illegally. They've been trespassing every day just to get to their own houses for over 20 years. And that wasn't all. We found multiple failed attempts by the HOA to buy the lake. One in 2016, another in 2018, and again in 2020. Each offer rejected. By my father. No wonder she hates you," Ryan muttered. "You're sitting on the one piece of land she can't control." As we left, something caught my eye. Peeking out from the trash can near Diane's reserved parking space was a crumpled paper. I pulled it out. It was a map of my property. A red X slashed across the lake, and a date scribbled in the corner. Next Saturday. The fake video was just the beginning. This map, this plan, it could bury her if I acted fast enough. But before I could prepare for what was next, something else happened that nearly broke me. That Saturday morning, I woke to a sound, a mechanical buzzing, low and angry, like a swarm of wasps circling my cabin. I rushed to the window, heart pounding. There it was, a drone. It hovered above the lake, its camera fixed directly on my home. It wasn't some random kid playing with a toy. It was surveillance. Targeted. Calculated. Malicious. I ran outside in yesterday's clothes, feet bare, slipping on the wet grass. The drone dipped lower, capturing me disheveled, unprepared. Just the way Diane wanted me to be seen. But that wasn't the worst part. 3 of my grandfather's oak trees he'd planted decades ago, had been hacked. Deep, fresh wounds oozed sap down their trunks. The ground was ripped up, tire tracks in the mud leading down to the water. I ran back inside, heart racing, and loaded my security footage. And what I saw made my blood run cold. Footage from 3 a.m. And what was on it changed everything. A figure cloaked in dark clothing had been methodically vandalizing my property for weeks, always staying just beyond the clear range of my security cameras. It was like a twisted game, a sick kind of dance right outside the edge of justice. But then, at exactly 4:17 a.m., the game changed. One of my outer cameras, placed further than anyone thought, caught something I hadn't expected. Diane Palmer. Not a shadow, not a blur. Diane Palmer herself, standing at the edge of my property, holding a drone controller in her hand. She wasn't even trying to hide. Maybe she thought I wouldn't have cameras reaching that far out. Maybe she thought she was untouchable. The rage that erupted in my chest was instant and volcanic. This woman wasn't just spreading lies anymore. She was actively committing crimes. She was destroying my property while carefully documenting the damage to turn the narrative around, to frame me as the villain. But that wasn't all. As I reviewed the footage, something else moved in the frame. Another person, crawling low through the bushes. It was Claire Hughes, carrying a camera with a long telephoto lens, snapping photos of the very destruction Diane had orchestrated. They were working together. Coordinated. Calculated. When I stepped outside in real time and caught Claire in the act, she froze like a deer in headlights, then scrambled away without a word. By noon, something inside me snapped. I couldn't hold back anymore. I drove straight to Diane's office, not even caring how I looked, soaked in stress, disheveled, furious. She was sitting behind her oversized desk, wearing that smug little smile like armor. "Nathan," she said with syrupy fake concern. "You look terrible. Is everything all right?" Her voice dripped with sarcasm, and I clenched my fists just to keep them from shaking. "Cut the act, Diane. I have you on camera. With the drone. I know exactly what you're doing." For the briefest moment, her mask slipped. Her eyes narrowed. But just as quickly, she transformed into the perfect actress. Tears welled up. Her hand fluttered to her chest like some Victorian drama queen. "How dare you accuse me of such things?" she wailed. But even as she sobbed, I caught it. A quick smirk, a flash of satisfaction when she thought I wasn't looking. "You're tearing our community apart, Nathan, with your paranoia and aggression. First the lake, now these wild accusations." Right on cue, Claire burst through the door, breathless and wide-eyed, playing the role of the frightened witness. They were putting on a show, and I was the villain in their script. I left that office more broken than before. It started raining as I sat by the lake that evening. Fitting, really. The gray clouds above mirrored the storm inside me. I sat there in silence, staring at the water my grandfather had loved so deeply, picking at the grass. Hollow-eyed. Lost. I won't let her win, I whispered to the wind. But truthfully, I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. How do you fight someone who has no shame, no boundaries? Someone who commits crimes and then cries victim? My phone buzzed again. Another notification. More comments on Diane's latest post, accusing me of being a danger to the community and destroying the environment. The irony? She had literally vandalized my trees while claiming I was the one hurting nature. It would have been laughable if it didn't hurt so much. Ryan found me there an hour later. He didn't say much, just sat beside me in the rain, jaw clenched, fists pounding the picnic table every now and then. We were both soaked to the bone, too numb to care. That night, desperate for something, anything, I started digging through my father's old computer files. He'd been meticulous, almost obsessive, about documentation. Deep in a folder labeled property disputes, I found an email chain from 2018 that stopped me cold. The HOA had offered to buy the lake property for $500,000, claiming they needed it for community development. My father's reply was respectful but resolute. The land wasn't for sale at any price. Diane's reply? Not so polite. In fact, she issued a warning. One way or another, this lake will serve the community. There were more emails, and each one grew more hostile, more aggressive, until the final one made an outright threat. If he didn't reconsider, they'd make his life miserable. And then, my old phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. A message, leave or your family's in trouble. I froze. Claire had clearly meant to send that message from a burner phone, but by mistake, she'd texted me, still saved in her contacts from years ago. That was the tipping point. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, James Morrison. Until now, he'd been cautious, even skeptical. But this changed everything. Nathan, this is serious, he said. That text is a direct threat. And get this, based on current development in the area, your land is now worth close to $3 million. $3 million. It hit me like a punch to the chest. No wonder they were going to such terrifying lengths. James wasn't done. There's more. I found records showing the HOA has been voting to allocate funds for lake acquisition every year since 2017. They've been planning this for a long time. Suddenly, all the pieces clicked. This wasn't just harassment. This was a coordinated effort to bully me off valuable land. The next morning, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. No signature, just 6 chilling words, sell the lake or else. Stamped on HOA letterhead. I showed it to Ryan. He nearly flipped the table in rage. That's it, he said, voice shaking. They're not just manipulative, they're criminals. We need to stop playing defense. We go on the offensive now. And he was right. I'd spent too long reacting, letting Diane write the story. It was time to turn the page. I stared at the footage of Diane with the drone, at Claire's threatening text, at the note on my car. The fear inside me slowly gave way to something else, resolve. They had threatened my family. They had tried to destroy my legacy. But they had made one critical mistake. They underestimated me. Monday morning marked the beginning of a counteroffensive. With James Morrison leading the charge, we filed a comprehensive lawsuit against the HOA. Charges of harassment, trespassing, vandalism, and terroristic threats. But I didn't stop there. I compiled all the evidence, footage, emails, texts, and edited a short, hard-hitting video telling the real story of what had been happening. The contrast was brutal. Diane crying on social media about environmental destruction, while her drone hovered over my property. Her accusing me of threats, while she chopped down my trees in the dead of night. I posted it with one sentence. The truth about Crestview HOA and my lake. Within hours, it went viral. Comments flooded in. Dozens of neighbors shared stories about their own run-ins with Diane. And then, something unexpected happened. Eleanor Walsh approached me at the coffee shop the next day. She slid into the booth across from me, eyes sharp, voice low. I've been waiting 5 years for someone to stand up to that woman, she whispered. At the last board meeting, while you were defending yourself, I saw Diane stuff some papers into her briefcase. Papers she didn't want anyone to see. And just like that, I had an ally I never expected. The tide was turning. And this time, it was turning in my favor. She was rifling through papers she clearly didn't want anyone else to see. Then, with a sharp, controlled motion, Eleanor slid a sealed manila envelope across the table toward me. My hands trembled as I reached for it. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming anticipation of what might be inside. I peeled it open, and there it was, proof. A legally binding contract between the Crestview HOA and Baxter Corporation, dated all the way back in 2017. It granted Baxter exclusive development rights to the lakefront property. My property. The very land the HOA had been scheming to take from me for months. The kicker? They'd already sold those rights, without my knowledge, without my consent. And worse, they now owed Baxter Corporation $50,000 in penalties for failing to deliver the land as promised. They had gambled on pushing me out, betting I'd eventually cave. The revelation should have been the moment everything turned in my favor. But Diane wasn't going down without unleashing hell. By Wednesday, she had launched her nuclear option. She somehow convinced First Community Bank that my property deed was suspicious, whispering lies and fake evidence of forgery behind closed doors. The bank responded by freezing my home equity line of credit, cutting off the funds I desperately needed for legal fees. When I confronted her, she didn't even try to hide her smugness. "Oh, Nathan," she said, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. "These things happen when your paperwork isn't properly maintained. Maybe it's time to reconsider that generous offer to sell. I'm sure we could make all these little problems go away." I stared at her, jaw clenched, doing everything in my power not to explode. "I just want justice," I growled, my voice low and steady. But she only laughed. Actually laughed. "Justice? This is Crestview, honey. I am justice here." But what Diane didn't realize was that she'd finally gone too far. The local newspaper, the Crestview Gazette, had been quietly following our situation for weeks. When I handed over the Baxter Corporation contract, along with proof of her backdoor dealings, harassment, and vandalism, they ran the story hard. Thursday morning, their headline blared across town: HOA president accused of land fraud scheme. The article laid it all bare: secret contracts, shady financials, personal vendettas. They even quoted other residents who had endured years of bullying from Diane. My phone didn't stop ringing all day. Neighbors who'd once been too afraid to speak suddenly found their courage. That evening, Ryan showed up practically vibrating with excitement. "Did you see the comments online?" he asked, waving his phone in front of me. "People are calling for Diane's resignation. Someone even started a petition." As he scrolled, post after post came into view, exposing more of Diane's skeletons. But Ryan hadn't just been watching. He'd been digging. And what he found took things to a whole new level. "Check this out," he said, laying out papers across my kitchen table. It turns out Diane had already been caught misusing HOA funds back in 2015. $30,000 in community money, gone, used for personal expenses. She was fined, made to pay it back, and swept it under the rug with barely a slap on the wrist. But now, that old scandal was coming back to bite her. Then came the discovery that sealed it all. While going through my late father's old safe, tucked behind some dusty bonds, I found a second copy of the Baxter contract. But this one had additional pages that had been mysteriously removed from the version the HOA had filed. These pages exposed everything. Diane had arranged to personally receive a $100,000 finder's fee if the lake property was acquired. It wasn't just a power play. She was profiting off the theft of my land. Every step she'd taken, every lie she told, it was all part of a calculated scheme to line her own pockets. And just when I thought I'd seen it all, Friday brought a new twist. Eleanor called me with an urgent update. "Diane's holding a closed-door emergency board meeting tonight," she said. "I have a friend inside. It's all about damage control. They're panicking. Be careful, Nathan. Cornered animals are dangerous." She wasn't wrong. Later that evening, as I was organizing our evidence for Monday's court hearing, my phone rang. The number was unknown. I answered. Silence. Then, a hiss, distorted, menacing. "You'll regret this. Stop now, or things get worse." The line went dead. Most people might have been scared, but I wasn't. I felt strangely calm. Because that threat? That was desperation. That was fear. I saved the number, filed a police report, and added the incident to our growing case. Diane was unraveling. Her empire was crumbling, and we were ready to bring it all down. The weekend flew by in a whirlwind of preparation. James, my attorney, reviewed everything and nodded with calm confidence. "We've got enough not just to win this," he said, "but to open a full-blown criminal investigation. Fraud, embezzlement, threats, it was all there. And then, Sunday night, I stood by the lake, watching the last light of day turn the water into a golden mirror. This land, it was more than property. It was my grandfather's legacy. It was memories. It was family. Diane didn't understand that. She thought power and money ruled the world. But I was fighting for something deeper, and I wasn't backing down. Then came Monday, the final move. But before we could even enter the courtroom, I received another anonymous call. Again, you'll regret this. I was winning, or at least I thought I was. But something shifted. That call wasn't just from Diane. It couldn't be. Was someone else pulling strings behind the scenes? Diane's arrogance made her reckless, but this felt calculated. Then the next blow hit, hard. I woke up to shouting outside. Over 30 people had gathered at the entrance to my property, waving signs that read, "Save our lake," and "Stop the destruction." Diane stood in front, holding a bullhorn, spewing lies into the morning air. This man wants to destroy everything we've built. He's in bed with corporate developers. The hypocrisy made my blood boil. But Diane had finally misread the town. The Crestview Gazette had already exposed her. The tide had turned. And then it happened. Mrs. Morrison, from the corner grocery store, stepped forward. She lowered her sign and shouted, "This is ridiculous, Diane. We all read about your secret deal with Baxter. You're the one trying to sell out our community." That was the spark. The crowd wavered, murmured, and then others followed. Signs dropped. Voices rose, not in anger at me, but against her. The truth was out, and Diane's grip on Crestview was slipping by the second. And that was just the beginning. It all started falling apart before my eyes. It was like the unraveling of a story that had been building for years, except this time, the villain wasn't getting away with it. Then, out of nowhere, someone, I still don't know who, launched the first tomato. It struck Diane's pristine white BMW with a loud, wet splatter that echoed through the cul-de-sac like a shot fired at tyranny. That single, satisfying splat was the spark. Within seconds, the air was filled with flying produce, tomatoes, apples, maybe even a squash or two, as years of pent-up frustration erupted into chaotic but oddly poetic justice. Residents who had lived under Diane's iron-fisted rule finally had their outlet, and someone, bless their soul, was recording every second of it. By the time I made it back to my porch, videos titled, "HOA President Gets Tomato Justice," were already exploding on social media. The neighborhood, once silenced by fear, had turned into a battleground of laughter and rebellion. That's when Eleanor Walsh chose her moment. She emerged from the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea, walking straight through the chaos with unwavering calm. In her hand was a thick folder, which she handed to me with the flair of someone who'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. "Nathan," she said, loud enough for everyone around to hear, "you might want this for your case." Inside the folder was a photograph that made my heart slam against my chest. It showed Diane and several board members sprawled out on picnic blankets beside my lake, smiling for the camera like they didn't have a care in the world. A banner in the background read, "HOA Board Retreat 2023. The kicker? The metadata showed the photo was taken just 6 months ago, long after Diane had started publicly claiming the lake was environmentally destroyed and off-limits. "This will sting her," Eleanor whispered with a wink, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. The crowd, momentarily stunned, went dead silent as I raised the photo into the air. Then came the shouting. Angry, passionate voices erupted, all directed at Diane. Her face went from flushed red to deep purple to a pale, almost ghostly white as the weight of public exposure crashed down on her like a tidal wave. Sheriff Greg Hansen had been parked across the street the whole time, watching the scene unfold from his patrol car. Now, he stepped out slowly, with the kind of calm, measured authority that commanded silence. His hand rested on his belt as he spoke. "All right, folks," he said in a voice that cut clean through the noise. "That's enough excitement for one morning." He turned to Diane. "Mrs. Palmer, I'm going to need you to disperse this gathering." Then he looked at me. "Nathan, I'll need copies of all your evidence. The DA's office is already very interested in this case." When he walked closer, his voice dropped. "I've been watching Diane for a while now," he said, low and serious. "She's not as clean as she pretends. Did you know she was investigated back in 2015 for embezzling HOA funds? paid the money back before charges were filed, but the pattern's there. His words landed hard. It confirmed everything Ryan had uncovered during our late-night research sessions, but hearing it directly from law enforcement made it real, tangible, validated. What followed was a whirlwind. All day long, residents who had stayed silent for years started speaking up. Tom from the hardware store apologized for refusing me service. Turned out Diane had threatened to organize a boycott if he didn't comply with her demands. A local dentist came forward, saying she'd been overcharged thousands in bogus assessments that mysteriously vanished. Every hour, another layer of Diane's corruption peeled away. By nightfall, the HOA's own social media page was imploding. Residents flooded the comment sections with demands for Diane's resignation. Ryan was in his element, grinning as he captured screenshots, cataloged evidence, and assembled what he called a digital reckoning. "No need for mud," he said with a victorious fist pump. "The paper trail buries her just fine." He was right. We had contracts, surveillance footage, financial statements, threats in writing. It was like watching a skyscraper of lies collapse, floor by floor, in slow motion. The local news caught wind of the story and aired a special report that evening. My little property dispute had gone regional. A breaking news banner scrolled across the screen. HOA president accused in elaborate fraud scheme. Reporters swarmed the neighborhood, interviewing everyone from angry residents to former board members. Diane scrambled to save face with a hastily arranged press conference, but it was a disaster. She stumbled through her statements, unable to answer even the most basic questions about the Baxter contract. Her lips pressed so tightly they all but disappeared as each reporter took turns dissecting her lies. Behind her, Claire looked like she wanted the earth to swallow her whole. Then came the final blow. A reporter held up the lake picnic photo and asked, "Mrs. Palmer, how do you explain this image of you enjoying a picnic at the supposedly destroyed lake?" Diane's face froze. "That was, we were conducting an environmental assessment," she stammered. The look on the reporters' faces said it all. No one was buying it. I thought that was the end of it, that we could finally breathe. I was wrong. At 2 a.m., my phone pinged, security camera alert. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped quietly onto my porch, phone in hand, ready to call 911. There, bathed in the eerie glow of moonlight, was Diane's BMW, parked halfway onto my property. And there she was, standing by the lake, with a gas can in her hand. Before I could even process what she was doing, headlights swept across the scene. Sheriff Hansen pulled up, his cruiser's lights cutting through the darkness like a warning shot. "Mrs. Palmer," he called out, his voice calm but commanding. "Step away from the gas can and put your hands where I can see them." The look on Diane's face in that moment, I'll never forget it. It wasn't just fear, it was the dawning realization that her power was gone, that the world she controlled had turned against her, that consequences had finally come knocking. She was arrested on the spot. I thought she was finished. I thought that was the final act. But I underestimated Diane Palmer. Because just as I was preparing to testify in court, one text changed everything. And I realized the real battle was just beginning. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this wasn't just a dispute. This was criminal intimidation." Diane's lawyer tried to spin it, to soften the blow. But honestly, what defense could he possibly offer in the face of such overwhelming, damning evidence? When Diane finally took the stand, she launched into her usual song and dance, spinning that tired web of lies. "I was protecting the community," she insisted, her voice rising with that trademark fake outrage. "That lake is a precious resource. It belongs to everyone." She tried to sound noble, but you could hear the cracks in her tone. Judge Keller's eyebrow arched so sharply it could have sliced glass. "Mrs. Palmer," she said evenly, "did you, or did you not, sign a contract to sell the development rights to a property you didn't even own?" Diane stammered, fumbling for words. That was a misunderstanding," she offered weakly. But the judge wasn't in the mood for games. Her voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "Yes or no, Mrs. Palmer?" Diane's face seemed to melt under the pressure, her confidence draining away in real time. And then, finally, in a whisper so quiet it was almost a breath, she admitted, "Yes." For a split second, I actually felt something close to sympathy for her. Almost. But that sympathy evaporated in an instant when the moment that changed everything happened. From the gallery, a soft, determined voice rang out. "Your Honor, I need to say something. It was Claire. She stood up slowly, face pale but resolute. The room filled with hushed murmurs as all eyes turned to her. Judge Keller gave the gavel a sharp bang. "Young lady, this is highly irregular," she said sternly. "But given the circumstances, I'll allow it." Approach the witness stand. Claire moved forward, her steps shaky but purposeful. She cast a glance toward Diane, a mix of guilt, fear, and defiance. Once she was sworn in, she took a steadying breath and spoke. "Diane paid me $500 to vandalize Mr. Brooks' property," she confessed. Her voice grew stronger with every word. "She gave me the axe and told me exactly which trees to damage. She said if I didn't do it, she'd make sure I lost my seat on the board, and she threatened to expose my bankruptcy." The courtroom fell into a heavy, stunned silence. You could hear hearts pounding in that moment. Diane's face had gone ghost white. She visibly swayed in her chair. "She's lying," Diane screeched, but her voice rang hollow. Even her attorney looked defeated, like a man already drafting an appeal he knew he wouldn't win. "There's more," Claire continued, voice trembling but honest. "I have text messages. Diane sent them from what she thought was a burner phone, but she used her regular one a few times by mistake." She held up her phone and handed it to the bailiff. The texts were explicit, damning, detailed, every step of the sabotage outlined clearly. Even the threatening message sent to me, all right there in black and white. "I'm so sorry," Claire said, voice cracking. "I was scared. I was stupid, but I can't lie anymore." Judge Keller reviewed the messages herself, scrolling through them slowly. With each swipe, her expression darkened. Finally, she looked up, her stare like frost. "Mrs. Palmer," she said coldly, "these messages show clear evidence of conspiracy to commit vandalism, witness intimidation, and fraud. This has gone well beyond a civil matter." Diane tried to rise to protest, but her legs buckled beneath her. She collapsed back into her chair, a crumbling monument to her own arrogance. The mighty HOA president who had ruled our neighborhood through fear was now exposed, broken, undone. But then came the real bombshell. Sheriff Hansen was called to the stand. He approached with quiet confidence, holding a small digital recorder in his hand. "Your Honor," he said, "following Mrs. Palmer's attempted arrest 2 weeks ago, she made a call from the back of my patrol car. She didn't realize all our vehicles are equipped with audio recorders." He pressed play. Diane's voice filled the courtroom. "Greg, please. I'll give you $10,000 in cash if you just say you made a mistake. Say you didn't see the gas can. Come on, we've known each other for years." Then came the sheriff's reply, measured, calm, but resolute. "Diane, you're asking me to commit a crime. And this conversation is being recorded." The air was sucked from the room. Everyone felt it. That was it. The final nail. Judge Keller didn't hesitate. "I'm referring this entire matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution," she announced. "Mr. Brooks, you are awarded full damages, plus punitive awards, totaling $250,000. Outside the courthouse, it felt like the entire town had gathered. People were hugging, clapping me on the back, shaking my hand. Claire approached, eyes glistening with tears. "Nathan, I'm so sorry. I know testifying doesn't fix what I did, but..." I held up a hand to stop her. "You did the right thing, Claire. That took courage." She nodded silently and slipped away into the crowd. Tom, from the hardware store, practically crushed my hand with a handshake. "We should have stood up to her years ago," he said. "You ever think about running for HOA president?" I actually laughed. "I don't need a title to enjoy my land. I just want peace." 3 days later, we held the mother of all barbecues at the lake. Ryan worked the grill, smoke curling up into a sky streaked with gold, while Eleanor kept everyone in stitches recounting Diane's ridiculous past antics. The golden sunset danced on the surface of the water my grandfather had loved. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I finally felt peace. I raised my drink and addressed the crowd. "This whole ordeal taught me something important," I said. "Bullies only have power when we let them. But the second we stand up, their paper kingdoms crumble. So here's to speaking truth, to standing strong, and protecting what matters." The cheer that went up could have scared every fish in the lake. But as the party died down and the crowd began to drift away, I saw something that made the hair on my neck stand up. A black SUV, parked just beyond my property line. Same make and model as Diane's. The windows were so dark, I couldn't see inside. The engine was running. It sat there for 5 long minutes. Watching. Waiting. Then slowly, it pulled away. Ryan caught my expression. What's wrong? I pointed to where the SUV had been. Maybe I'm paranoid, but that looked just like Diane's car. He frowned. Didn't she make bail? We stared at each other, both thinking the same thing. This might not be over. Have you ever been wronged like this? As I stared out into the dark, I asked the night air a question I wasn't sure I wanted the answer to. Diane might be down, but was she out? Because that black SUV told me one thing. The war might have just begun. Who's in that SUV? Is Diane planning her comeback? Or is someone even worse stepping into the shadows? If your jaw dropped, good. If you laughed, even better. Now subscribe, because trust me, the next story, it'll blow this one out of the water.